Greetings everybody, my name is Chris Simmons, or depending on what channel this goes up on, you may know me as Zero Yeti. And today I would like to show you a presentation I've made about the concept of bison belts, which are a thought experiment on prairie permaculture. Now, first up, I should probably explain what permaculture is. Permaculture, aka permanent agriculture, or permanent culture, is a philosophy of an approach to agriculture and settlement design, as well as land management, that draws upon the ecological systems and biological arrangements found in nature to create ecologically harmonious, productive, and sustainable ways of living as part of the environment around us and not somehow separate from it. It should be noted that permaculture is not a new or novel concept, and many indigenous communities around the globe have and still do practice various forms of permaculture for millennia. There's also been a considerable amount of scientific research into various forms of permaculture, such as harvestable aquaculture and then green design, but by far and away the most popular form and most well-studied form of permaculture is the food forest. Essentially, a food forest is a form of permaculture where instead of planting an orchard with one kind of tree, one plants several different species of trees, as well as herbs, berry bushes, tubers, and edible and medicinal vines. And because this creates more of a harvestable ecosystem of plants as opposed to a monoculture, it additionally attracts insects and various small animals, which can also be sustainably harvested for food, as well as to simply maintain and bolster a region's biodiversity. Now, a food forest is comprised of mainly 7 layers. There's the canopy layer, which is made up of large fruit and nut trees, the understory, which is made of small fruit and nut trees, the shrub and bush layer, which is comprised of edible bushes like currants and berries. You have the herbaceous layer, which is made up of herbs and forbs and taller grasses, the rhizosphere, which is like your root vegetables, and then you have your ground cover, which is like clover, strawberries, edible fungi, and then shorter grasses. And then finally, your vertical layer, which is that of vines and leafy climbers. Now, there's been a considerable amount of research into food forests, but less research into other terrestrial ecosystems and like how permaculture can play a role into those, like scrublands or grasslands. So I've kind of pitching the idea of a food prairie. Now, the core concept of a bison belt or food prairie is to take the template of and science behind a food forest, that being a multi-leveled ecosystem comprised of food and resource-producing crops, and applying that to the grassland environment. Instead of 7 layers in a food forest, a food prairie has 5 layers. Now, your 5 layers, your top layer of the 5 layers is going to be your shrub and bush layer. There's also the occasional smaller tree, and these are comprised of things like currants, berry bushes, hazelnut trees, pawpaw trees like you see here, and various edible shrubs. And then you have your main layer, which is going to be your grass layer. And this can be made up of edible grasses, such as you see here of oats. And then you have buffalo grass, alfalfa, foxtail grass, sorghum, brome, wheat. Grasses like that. Next up is your herb and forb layer, which is going to be stuff like sunflowers, hemp, coneflowers, lavender, and various other herbs. And then you have your rhizosphere, which is your root vegetables. So your turnips, your beets, your potatoes, your garlic, your onions, your carrots, and other starchy tubers like them. And then you have your ground cover. So examples are like dandelions, white clover. You have edible fungi like the citronella mushroom here. But a food prairie is not just comprised of the plants and fungi that grow within it, but instead the idea of a bison belt, which is in the name, is also going to tie heavily into animal production and animal raising, for both maintaining the ecosystem as well as supplying a ready supply of meat and various other usable goods like hide and milk and eggs. So when looking at that, we got to factor in megafauna, especially when we look at the health of a grassland ecosystem. We have megafauna. Now, it should be noted that megafauna such as bison, horses, muskox have been shown to impact their ecosystems beyond just grazing in both directly and indirectly positive ways through the clearing of trees, pruning of shrubbery, stomping down of snow in winter, fertilization of the soil, and just turning over nutrients in general. And so it's important to have these megafauna to help maintain the grassland ecosystem and keep it stable. So you have your bison, saiga antelope, wild horses, elk. These are your grazers. And then you also should factor in browsers such as white-tailed deer, goats, pronghorn, peccaries, and then even mixed feeders where they don't just eat only grasses or only more shrubbery. They eat a mix of it. So stuff like your Bactrian camels, your donkeys, your bighorn sheep, and your yaks. In addition, as we're trying to create an ecosystem, we should also incorporate smaller animals, such as small mammals such as rabbits, prairie dogs, armadillos, and opossums. And it's also important when you're introducing smaller game to introduce predators. Now, I'm not suggesting anything crazy like introducing tigers or even wolves, but it's important to have some smaller predators to make sure you don't have things like rabbit blights take over an ecosystem or small game just overwhelm the entire thing. So animals like black-footed ferrets, bobcats, badgers, and even coyotes are important to have in adequate numbers to help maintain the numbers of smaller game. Additionally, you also factor in your reptilians, such as snakes, like your hognose snakes, and turtles and tortoises, like box turtles or Russian tortoises, as well as lizards, like your various skinks and horned lizards, or like this American five-lined lizard. And then another big factor in your ecosystem is going to be your game birds. And these are birds that you can hunt for both food as well as collect their eggs for nutrients or just have them to help bolster the ecosystem. So your wild turkeys, your sandhill cranes, your doves, your quail, your pheasants, and your prairie chickens. And then you also have your predatory birds that can also help maintain adequate populations. So your prairie falcons, your golden eagles, your burrowing owls. And then it's also good to have scavengers, such as the aforementioned coyotes, but also like turkey vultures. And then every ecosystem on Earth needs their invertebrates. And so I try to give have a good focus on animals like invertebrates, especially that can both provide food for you directly, like food for humans directly, such as your edible snails and your grasshoppers, as well as ones that produce substances that we can utilize, like honeybees, as well as you want invertebrates to help bolster the environment, like your worms, and even pollinators that can help out, such as your butterflies and your moths and your beetles. In conclusion, substantial strips of grassland planted with edible grasses and other usable plants would maintain fairly large herds of somewhat free-ranged bison, as well as other animals such as elk and horses, which would in turn help maintain said edible prairie ecosystem and actively create environments for other animals such as rabbits, butterflies, bees, prairie dogs, tortoises, coyotes, and various birds. And by using permaculture methods, we could regularly and reliably sustainably harvest these bison belts by gathering edible crops and hunting small game on a fairly frequent basis, in addition to culling some of the larger herbivores every couple of years to maintain adequate populations, thus ensuring a productive prairie ecosystem that can sustain people, plants, and animals in perpetuity. Here are the various links to all the images I have used, as well as various works that I used in making this presentation. As always, take care to my guys, gals, and non-binary pals.